The sun rose gently over Atlanta, casting a golden glow on the pristine glass windows of Sterling Motors, one of the top luxury car dealerships in the southeastern United States, where inside million-dollar deals were negotiated with champagne, smiles, and smooth-talking salesmen. Yet behind the scenes, a different kind of test was unfolding because the owner, Jamila Sterling, the black woman powerhouse who built the empire from the ground up after inheriting nothing but her late father's mechanic, tools, and wisdom, had decided it was time to see the truth behind the facade she had created, not through board meetings or security cameras, but with her own eyes and ears. Walking in not as the boss in a custom-tailored suit, but as a curious customer, a woman in sneakers, jeans, and a hoodie, ready to experience what her clients, especially those who looked like her, faced on the floor. Slipping past the morning bustle with a quiet confidence, Jamila disguised her signature curls under a plain beanie and kept her diamond-studded watch in her purse, replaced by a cheap fitness tracker. And as she pushed open the front doors of her own dealership, she was met with the usual sparkle, the glint of polished Bentleys, the waft of expensive leather, and a curated playlist humming low. But what wasn't usual was the reaction of the staff. She was ignored for several minutes by the two receptionists locked in a conversation about their brunch plans, until one of them finally glanced over and said, "Can I help you?" with the kind of tone usually reserved for suspected shoplifters, not realizing the woman in front of them signed their paychecks. And Jamila responded politely, asking about test driving one of the new electric models she had greenlit 6 months ago, only to be waved off with a dismissive, "You'll need to wait for someone to be available," as a young white couple walked in behind her and were immediately welcomed with beaming smiles, fresh coffee, and ushered toward a gleaming Genesis coupe. Jamila stood silent, not out of shock because she'd long suspected disparities existed despite the diversity initiatives she had pushed from corporate, but because it was worse seeing it in person, feeling the weight of disregard from her own people, knowing they saw her only as a broke black woman probably looking for free AC and a selfie in front of a sports car. But things escalated when the client who would make headlines entered. Bradley Owens, a wealthy, arrogant local real estate developer known for his loud opinions and louder suits, strolled in with his Rolex gleaming and a Bluetooth earpiece permanently attached, talking loudly about how he was looking to replace his old Lambo with something sexier. He glanced at Jamila with narrowed eyes, scanned her up and down, and leaned toward a salesman saying, "What's she doing here?" loudly enough for her to hear, adding, "Thought this was a dealership, not a shelter." Jamila clenched her jaw but kept her calm, stepping closer to a different vehicle while another salesman finally approached her half-heartedly asking what she was looking for, and before she could answer, Bradley, who had taken it upon himself to act like a gatekeeper, interrupted, stepping in front of her, blocking the car door she was examining and saying with a fake chuckle, "Ma'am, this isn't the kind of place where you browse or write. Maybe try down the road. There's a used car lot there that might be more your speed." Jamila looked him dead in the eyes, unshaken, and said only, "I'm fine, thank you." But he pushed again, louder this time, "No, you're not fine, you're making people uncomfortable." A manager who had overheard the exchange rushed over, nervously inserting himself between them and apologizing to Bradley, completely ignoring Jamila and offering to handle the situation. Jamila stepped back, simmering but calculating, and decided she'd seen enough for one day, slipping out without revealing her identity, while Bradley smirked and muttered, "Some people just don't know their place." But what he didn't know was that she was his boss. She was the owner, and she was about to rewrite his idea of place, because the next morning the real Jamila returned, not in disguise but in command, heels clicking, staff standing. The floor manager visibly pale as he realized the customer from the day before was actually their CEO. And the panic spread like wildfire as Jamila called an emergency meeting with the entire team, announcing not only a review of customer interaction footage but the implementation of anonymous audit programs, a full internal diversity retraining, and personal disciplinary notes to the very people who had failed their roles. And when she finally turned to Bradley, who had returned expecting VIP treatment again, she didn't scream or lecture. She simply smiled coldly and said, "Mr. Owens, I've reviewed your behavior yesterday, and I've decided we won't be doing business with you," handing him a printed letter barring him from all Sterling Motor locations, while the entire staff stood stunned. The same woman they had dismissed now standing taller than any of them, not with rage, but with a grace so powerful it silenced the room. And as Bradley fumbled with his words, realizing who she was, trying to backtrack and flatter, she turned and walked away, pausing only to say over her shoulder, "Next time, don't judge people by their sneakers. You might be talking to the CEO." The aftershocks of the CEO's dramatic return rippled through Sterling Motors like a sudden lightning bolt, cracking a serene sky, and the staff, once comfortably entrenched in routine, now walked on eggshells as Jamila Sterling summoned the executive leadership team for a closed-door meeting that would not only redefine policy but dismantle the very culture that had been silently growing beneath the surface like mold behind polished walls. Jamila now seated at the head of the long glass boardroom table, no longer undercover, but adorned in a striking navy suit with gold cufflinks shaped like panther heads. A silent homage to her late mother's strength, tapped her fingers on a manila folder marked Audit Findings, and began not with accusations, but with a question. How many of you have ever been mistaken for someone who doesn't belong? The room fell silent, uneasily shifting, executives avoiding her gaze as she leaned forward, her eyes cutting through pretense. Because yesterday, in our flagship dealership, I was, gasps murmured around the table. But she didn't flinch, instead detailing every nuance of her experience the day before, from the receptionist's dismissiveness to the sales rep's unwillingness to help, through the humiliation at the hands of a man whose bank account had convinced him he could define who deserved to be there. Jamila paused only briefly, letting the silence sit heavy, then opened the folder and laid out page after page of customer complaint logs, hidden data, exit interviews from talented black employees who had left quietly, and secret shopper reports she had quietly commissioned months ago that revealed a stark disparity in how clients of color were treated versus their white counterparts. Some were passed over, some were followed, others were questioned as if they were intruders, and it became undeniable. Her empire had termite sand. She wasn't going to let it rot from within. One executive, a balding VP of sales named Gordon, who had long grown used to blending charm with plausible deniability, that attempted to defend the dealership's numbers, citing record-breaking profits and strong client retention. But Jamila cut him off mid-sentence with a quiet but commanding, "Profit does not excuse prejudice." And just like that, the illusion of immunity cracked as she moved into action, announcing a new role, Chief of Equity and Client Experience, reporting directly to her, and a reshuffling of regional management starting immediately, including placing the floor manager who had enabled Bradley's behavior on immediate leave. Pending review, then came the moment of reckoning. She projected Bradley Owens' name on the screen along with an email chain that revealed not only his arrogance but his veiled threats to take his millions elsewhere if the weren't filtered out. The room tensed as Jamila revealed that Bradley was a silent investor in 2 of their contracted real estate properties and had even offered campaign donations to sway her into private deals, a scandal waiting to explode. But instead of folding under the weight of power, she stood and said with icy calm, "I'll burn every deal that smells of discrimination. And if that costs us millions, then we will rebuild with people who know what integrity looks like." And her voice, calm but fierce, echoed like thunder. This wasn't about business anymore. This was about legacy. Her father had taught her how to rotate tires and rebuild transmissions, but he'd also taught her about the quiet pride of never letting anyone question your worth. And Jamila wasn't about to let the very thing she'd built become a tool to belittle others who looked like her. The meeting ended not with applause, but with solemn, determined silence, as one by one, even the most resistant executives nodded, realizing that the woman they'd once underestimated as ambitious was in fact a tidal force. And that night, while social media buzzed over rumors of something big happening at Sterling Motors, Jamila sat alone in her office with the lights low, reviewing resumes for her new diversity hire, sipping tea from a mug that read "CEO, not your secretary," when an alert popped up, a viral TikTok video posted by a young black woman showing herself being brushed off at the dealership just 3 weeks ago, the footage clear. The humiliation ran. Jamila watched it silently, then picked up her phone and called her communications director. "We're owning this. Full transparency. Prepare a statement and schedule an interview. Tomorrow morning I go live," because this time, it wasn't about saving face, it was about saving soul. And Jamila Sterling would not let her dealership become a symbol of exclusion, not while she drew breath. Morning light bathed the glass panels of Sterling Motors headquarters as camera crews and reporters gathered outside like storm clouds, their lenses locked on the steps where Jamila Sterling, CEO, disruptor, and now viral symbol of corporate accountability, was about to face the world not with a rehearsed PR statement, but with unflinching truth. The video of her undercover mistreatment had exploded overnight, pulled from internal footage she had courageously released, and paired with the TikTok of the young black woman ignored weeks prior. The internet had turned the story into a firestorm of outrage and praise, while hashtags like #CEO in sneakers and #respect starts at the top trended globally, drawing attention from news anchors, celebrities, activists, and business leaders alike. But Jamila wasn't concerned with fame. She was focused on justice, and as she stepped out onto the press podium in a crisp black suit with no jewelry except a silver pin reading "Dignity," her voice was steady and unapologetic. "What happened to me should never have happened to anyone," she began, and the world listened as she recounted the experience that started it all, not for sympathy, but as a warning shot to every company that prioritized image over inclusion, sales over soul, and culture over account. Announced sweeping changes. Every Sterling Motors location would be subjected to quarterly equity audits conducted by an external civil rights watchdog. Every employee would undergo rigorous client sensitivity and unconscious bias training, and most powerfully, she was creating $1 million fund from her own stock dividends to support young black professionals entering the automotive industry, from engineers to executives, so they never have to fight the same battles I did just to be seen. Reporters peppered her with questions, trying to pull scandal from sincerity, but she remained steadfast, even when asked whether she feared backlash from wealthy clients like Bradley Owens. "I don't fear losing money," she replied calmly. "I fear losing purpose." And as the broadcast went viral, viewed by millions in real time, the impact was immediate. The dealership's stock dipped temporarily, but their brand loyalty soared, especially among younger buyers in communities long marginalized in luxury markets. While job applications surged and top universities began inquiring about partnerships with her new diversity fund, but not everyone was celebrating. Bradley Owens, humiliated and fuming, took to social media in a desperate attempt to control the narrative, posting a poorly lit video from his mansion where he claimed he had been set up by a race-baiting CEO, but his comments section turned into a digital reckoning, flooded with thousands calling out his behavior, including former employees of his companies who anonymously posted similar racist and misogynistic encounters. And within days, his empire began to crumble. A key investor pulled out, the city council opened an ethics inquiry, and to clients, publicly cut ties. Meanwhile, inside Sterling Motors, the transformation was tangible, not just procedural. Jamila walked the floors personally, meeting staff one by one, listening to their stories, promoting 2 black women from administrative roles to leadership positions, and inviting the young TikTok creator, whose video had helped spark the revolution, to lunch, not as a PR stunt but as a show of gratitude and connection over vegan soul food. The young woman, named Tay, shared how she'd grown up watching her mother get mistreated in stores, how she nearly deleted the video out of fear of not being believed, and how shocked she was to see someone like Jamila own the truth so boldly. Jamila smiled softly and said, "The fight doesn't end with going viral. We're build from it," and build she did, because while Bradley sank, Jamila soared, not because she took revenge but because she modeled restoration. She even invited her own staff into a town hall livestream where anonymous questions could be submitted and answered live. When someone asked, "How do we know you're not just doing this for show?" Jamila answered, "Because I'm not here to perform, I'm here to change the way power looks, feels, and acts." And that authenticity struck a chord across industries, from tech firms to fashion houses who began reaching out for guidance. But Jamila remained focused on one thing: cleaning her house before consulting on others. And it wasn't until a letter arrived handwritten from Bradley's ex-wife that she paused to reflect. The letter, carefully penned, apologized for his actions and revealed years of silence she'd endured from his entitled worldview, concluding with, "Your strength gave me the courage to file for divorce and reclaim my voice. Thank you." Jamila held the letter for a long time, realizing that what began as a disguised visit to her own showroom had grown into something far larger, a cultural reset, one that echoed far beyond luxury cars and boardroom deals, into homes, into classrooms, into the dreams of every young black woman who had ever been told to lower her eyes or her voice or her expectations. Jamila didn't need revenge, she needed results, and now she had them, not just in policy, but in impact. And as she sat at her desk that night, her inbox flooded with both praise and pushback, she whispered to herself, "We're not done," because while the headlines celebrated her as a warrior CEO, Jamila knew the real work had only just begun. As summer settled into its final stretch and the sun draped long golden shadows across the marble floors of Sterling Motors' main lobby, there was a noticeable shift in the air, not just from the new scent of fresh orchids arranged by the reception desk or the curated jazz playlist echoing through the halls, but from something deeper, something structural and spiritual, because Sterling Motors was no longer just a dealership. It had become a case study in cultural rebirth, and at the heart of it all stood Jamila Sterling, the once underestimated CEO whose decision to go undercover had triggered a movement far beyond her original intention of exposing casual bias. Now, nearly 3 months after the incident with Bradley Owens and the viral firestorm that followed, Jamila sat quietly in a circular conference room surrounded by 30 bright-eyed interns, many of them young, black, brown, first-generation college students, engineers, marketing majors, business students from HBCUs and Ivy Leagues alike, all handpicked from over 12,000 applicants who flooded her inbox after she launched the Drive Forward initiative, a mentorship and funding program that had already received private support from companies that had once turned a blind eye to inclusion. Jamila wasn't interested in checking boxes or leading day seminars that went nowhere. She was investing in new pipelines, helping shape the very next generation of executives, engineers, and thinkers who wouldn't have to sneak through back doors to claim a seat at the table because she was building bigger tables. And as she looked around the room at their eager faces, she saw reflections of herself. The version of her who once worked 16-hour days fixing transmissions in her father's old shop. The version of her who couldn't get funding from a single bank because no one wanted to bet on a young black woman in the car business. The version who walked into meetings only to be asked if she was there to take notes, not lead on. Now here she was, shaping destinies while outside the glass doors, the final remnants of the old culture were being scrubbed away, one policy at a time. Gone were the nepotistic promotions, the coded dress code language, the unspoken assumption that black clients needed to prove themselves now. Each store had community liaisons, equity scorecards, transparency dashboards, and managers who understood that customer service wasn't just about selling luxury, it was about selling respect. And yet, the world wasn't finished testing Jamila, because just as momentum built toward her model being adopted by other national dealership chains, a quiet legal threat emerged. Bradley Owens, desperate and bitter, filed a defamation lawsuit claiming Jamila's viral response cost him reputational and economic damages, a lawsuit that had no real weight but was clearly meant to rattle her, to draw her into courtrooms and headlines, to punish her for refusing to stay silent. But Jamila, undeterred, responded not with fear, but with facts, releasing receipts, emails, and client reports in a counter-lawsuit that detailed a pattern of exclusionary and retaliatory behavior on his part. While his legal team tried to spin the case as a media hit job, public support flooded Jamila's way, including sworn statements from former employees of Bradley's who detailed his racism, sexism, and threats to blacklist people who didn't act right. What began as an insult in a showroom had become a reckoning in court, and as Jamila sat beside her legal counsel, composed and regal in a navy pantsuit with subtle gold earrings, she realized that what she was doing wasn't just about justice for herself. It was about sending a message to every boardroom, every front desk, every waiting lounge in America. Respect is not optional, and power must come with principle. And when the judge threw out Bradley's lawsuit citing abuse of legal process and insufficient grounds, the courtroom erupted in applause from observers, while Bradley stormed out, red-faced, his empire further crumbling, his name now synonymous with corporate bigotry, his attempt to bully a black woman CEO becoming the cautionary tale of the decade. Yet Jamila didn't gloat. She simply walked out the courthouse and hugged her assistant Tiana, who whispered through tears, "You just changed everything for all of us." And she had. Because in the weeks that followed, other CEOs, white, black, male, female, began openly crediting Jamila Sterling for inspiring internal overhauls, while university professors taught her story in business ethics classes and mainstream media called her the quiet force who reshaped luxury. But none of that mattered more to Jamila than what happened one Sunday morning in September when a little black girl with cornrows and wide eyes walked into Sterling Motors with her mother, pointed to a giant mural of Jamila in the showroom lobby commissioned by a local artist and framed by glass and gold, and said, "Mommy, she looks like me," to which the mother replied, "She is like you, and don't let anyone tell you you don't belong here." Jamila watched from the balcony, tears pricking her eyes, knowing that the legacy she was leaving behind wasn't about cars or lawsuits or viral moments. It was about planting seeds in the soil of dignity, about proving that a black woman didn't need to scream to be heard, didn't need to kneel to be accepted, and didn't need to be anything other than herself to lead empires. And as she turned away from the balcony, headed toward a meeting with another group of young interns, she smiled softly and whispered, "We belong everywhere."